by my own family. Until I realized the house itself was rigged to ensure none of us walked out alive. The silence in our house wasn't peaceful. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket woven from years of unspoken resentments, and the sickly sweet scent of my mother's lilies. I sat at the mahogany dining table, the wood cool against my palms, staring at the legal document that had just shattered my entire reality. It was a transfer of deed, a signature forged with such chilling precision that for a fleeting moment, I almost doubted my own memory of our father's last wishes. Elena sat across from me, her posture perfect, her face a mask of sisterly concern that didn't reach those cold, shark-like eyes. She held a cup of chamomile tea as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis, as if she hadn't just stolen the only thing I had left of my father, the cabin in the mountains where we spent every summer until he passed. My mother stood by the window, her back to us, staring out at the rain-slicked driveway. She hadn't turned around once since Elena presented the paperwork, not even when I pleaded with her to look at the handwriting, to see the glaring discrepancies. "It's what he would have wanted, Clara," Elena said, her voice dripping with a rehearsed, honeyed softness. "You were always so volatile, so unpredictable. Dad knew you'd sell it to pay off your mounting debts. He wanted the estate kept in the family. With me, the audacity was breathtaking. I had no debts. I had sacrificed my 20s to care for Dad while Elena was traveling through Europe, sending postcards from places I couldn't pronounce while he wasted away. I stood up, the chair screeching against the floorboards, a harsh, jagged sound in the quiet room. "You lying snake," I hissed, my hands shaking. "You know he changed his will months before he died. He left it to me because he knew you didn't care for the place, or for him. Mom, tell her. Tell her you were there when he signed the original document." My mother finally turned, but the look on her face wasn't one of maternal defense. It was a look of cold, calculating exhaustion. She walked over to the table and placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a knife to my gut. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had suddenly become an inconvenience. "I think it's time you stop living in your fantasies, Clara," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Your father was confused at the end. Medications, old age, it played tricks on his mind. Elena has been handling the finances for a long time now. She knows what is best for this family. You've always been the one looking for drama, looking to stir up trouble where there is none." I felt the blood drain from my face. The betrayal wasn't just Elena's. It was a conspiracy. They had been planning this, whispering in corners, waiting for the perfect moment to strip me of my heritage and my dignity. "You're both in on this," I whispered, the realization dawning on me with the force of a physical blow. "You're rewriting history while his body isn't even cold in the ground." Elena leaned forward, her smile widening into something predatory. She pulled a manila folder from under the table and slid it toward me. My breath hitched as I looked at the top page. It wasn't just about the cabin. It was an eviction notice, backed by a psychiatrist's note, a note that claimed I was mentally unstable and unfit to hold property, signed by a doctor I had never even met. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, Clara," Elena whispered, her voice chillingly hollow. "But Mom agrees. It's for your own good. We've already contacted the authorities to have you escorted out of the property by morning. If you try to fight us, well, let's just say the police are very interested in those episodes you've been having lately." I stared at the paper, then at the two women who had raised me, the walls of the dining room seemingly closing in as I realized I wasn't just being disinherited, I was being erased. I grabbed the folder, my mind racing for a way to prove the fraud, when my eyes caught a glimpse of something tucked into the back of the envelope. It was a photograph, dated 3 days after my father's funeral, showing my mother and Elena standing in front of a lawyer's office, both of them grinning at the camera, holding a document that looked exactly like the one they were using to destroy me. But as I reached for it, my mother stepped forward, her hand clamping down on my wrist with a grip that was surprisingly, terrifyingly strong. And she leaned in close enough for me to smell the stale bitterness of her perfume. "Don't look at that," she hissed, her eyes flickering toward the hallway where the floorboards suddenly creaked under the weight of someone standing just outside the door. "Unless you want to know who else signed that deed." The pressure of her thumb against my wrist felt like a branding iron. I yanked my hand back, stumbling into the chair, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway was shrouded in shadow, but the silhouette standing just beyond the threshold was unmistakable. It was Uncle Marcus, the executor of the estate, the man who had sat by my father's deathbed, the man who had promised me, hand on his heart, that he would protect my interests. "Marcus?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't step into the light. He remained a dark, imposing shape, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his expensive wool coat. Elena's smirk deepened, a look of smug triumph that made my skin crawl. She stood up, smoothing her dress, and walked over to join the figure in the hallway. "We told you, Clara," she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing register. "We've been preparing for this for a long time. Did you really think you could just coast on your good daughter reputation forever, while we did the actual work of securing our future?" I looked at my mother, searching for a flicker of the woman who used to braid my hair and read me stories in that very same cabin. Instead, I saw a stranger. Her face was set in granite, a mask of cold indifference. "You were always the soft one, Clara," she said, finally letting go of the pretense of maternal love. "Softness is a liability in this family. Your father knew it. He begged me to help him fix his mistake before he died, to make sure the legacy didn't end up in your incapable hands. This isn't betrayal, it's an intervention." The logic was so twisted, so gaslit, that I felt a surge of nausea. "He loved me," I spat, my voice cracking. "He told me he was proud of me. You're manipulating his memory to justify your own greed." Marcus finally stepped into the room. The light from the chandelier caught the cruel line of his mouth. He held a small, black digital recorder in his hand, clicking it off with a rhythmic, sickening snap. "Your father said a lot of things when he was sedated, Clara," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "But we have recordings, carefully curated, of course, that suggest he was deeply concerned about your mental state. If these were to reach the local news outlets, or heaven forbid, the board at your workplace, well, you wouldn't just lose the cabin. You'd lose everything." I backed away, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood, retreating until my back hit the cold glass of the window. The rain outside turned into a downpour, mirroring the storm raging inside me. They weren't just stealing the property, they were liquidating my character. They were systematically dismantling my life, piece by piece, turning my world into a prison of their design. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why go this far? Why not just ask for money? Why destroy me?" Elena took a step toward me, her heels sharp on the floor, sounding like gunfire in the heavy silence. "Because you were the golden child, Clara. You were the one he actually liked. You were the one who got his attention, his praise, his time. We were just the people in the background, making sure the lights stayed on and the bills were paid. We're finally balancing the scales." She reached out, grabbing the folder I had dropped, and pulled out the photograph I had glimpsed earlier. She held it up, showing me the date stamp. November 14th, the day after the funeral. Then, she pulled out a second document, a medical authorization form that granted her full power of attorney over my personal affairs, signed with a scrawl that looked suspiciously like my own hand. My pulse surged. I realized then that they weren't just relying on lies, they had been drugging me. The migraines I'd been having over the last few months, the gaps in my memory, the exhaustion. It hadn't been grief. It had been something else, administered in the tea my mother insisted on brewing for me every night. "You poisoned me," I whispered, the realization chilling my blood. My mother's face remained impassive, but her eyes darkened. She stepped forward, pulling a small vial from her apron pocket and setting it on the table with a soft, final thud. "I kept you calm, Clara. I kept you from making a scene. And now, You're going to be a very good girl and sign the voluntary commitment papers. I scanned the room, looking for an exit, a weapon, a phone, anything. But the landline was dead, and my cell phone was missing from my pocket, likely snatched while I was slumped on the couch earlier. My only hope was the heavy brass candlestick on the mantel behind me. I gauged the distance, my muscles tensing. "Sign them, Clara," Marcus urged, his hand drifting toward his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a heavy, professional-looking fountain pen. "Or we take the other route. And trust me, the institution we've chosen for you doesn't have many visitors." I lunged, not for the pen, but for the heavy crystal vase on the sideboard, swinging it toward the window in a desperate bid to smash the glass and run for the woods. But as the vase left my hands, the front door swung open with a violent crash. A man stood there, dripping wet, his face obscured by the hood of his raincoat. He wasn't the police. He was holding a stack of original, notarized documents that were clearly not the fakes they were using. He looked at me, then at the three of them, and uttered a name that stopped the breath in my throat. "I think," the stranger said, his voice echoing with a terrifying familiarity, "that we have some unfinished business regarding the actual inheritance." The air in the room didn't just grow thin. It seemed to vanish entirely, replaced by the scent of ozone and wet pavement. The man pulled back his hood, revealing a face I hadn't seen in over a decade. A face that lived only in the old, faded Polaroids tucked away in my father's desk. It was Arthur, my father's estranged younger brother, the man who had been exiled by my mother 20 years ago for reasons she claimed were too dark for a young girl's ears. My mother's face, usually so composed, fractured into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. "You," she breathed, the word sounding like a curse. "You have no business here. You're dead to this family, Arthur. The restraining order—" "Expired 3 years ago, Martha," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that cut through the tension like a blade. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on Marcus, who had gone deathly pale. Arthur tossed the stack of papers onto the table. They slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop directly in front of my mother. I wasn't the one who was dead to the family. I was the one who was keeping the books. And unlike Marcus here, I know how to keep a ledger that doesn't just show money. It shows secrets. Elena let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, clutching her throat. "Who are you to waltz in here? You're a vagabond, a ghost. Whatever papers you have, they're invalid. The estate is already in probate under my name." Arthur finally turned his gaze toward her, and for the first time, I saw genuine pity in his eyes. It was worse than the malice. It was the look one gives a wounded animal. Probate depends on the validity of the death certificate and the last will and testament, doesn't it, Elena? Too bad the one you filed was a forgery so sloppy it wouldn't pass a middle school audit. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And it's a real shame that you forgot about the secondary safe in the basement of the mountain cabin. The one I helped your father install the night before he died." My mother lunged for the papers, her fingers clawing at the thick vellum, but Arthur stepped in her path, his frame blocking her. "Don't, Martha. That stack contains the real will, witnessed by 3 disinterested parties, and a confession recorded by your husband the night he realized you were slowly poisoning his heart medication." The room went deathly silent. I could hear the rhythmic thud, thud of my own heart, loud as a drum. My mother wasn't just pale anymore. She was ghostly, her lips trembling as she stared at the man she had spent 2 decades trying to erase. "You're lying," she choked out, her voice barely a thread. "He didn't know. He couldn't have known." "He knew everything," Arthur said, turning to look at me. His expression softened, but it didn't reach his eyes, which remained hard as flint. "Clara, you've been living in a house of mirrors. Everything you thought you knew, your father's illness, the reason for my exile, even the truth about who your mother was before she married into this life, it's all a construct, a beautifully crafted cage." Marcus, realizing the tide had shifted, started backing toward the door, his hand fumbling for his phone. "This is a private matter. We're calling the sheriff." "Call them," Arthur said, sounding bored. "I've already sent copies of these files to the district attorney's office, the local press, and the IRS. By the time they arrive, this house won't be a home. It'll be a crime scene." I felt the ground beneath me shift. The betrayal of my sister, the cold manipulation of my mother, it suddenly felt small, like a symptom of a much larger, more grotesque disease. I walked toward the table, my hand reaching for the folder Arthur had brought. I needed to see it. I needed to see the proof that I wasn't the insane one, that I wasn't the one who had failed my father. As my fingers brushed the edge of the document, the front door swung open again. This time, it wasn't the police, and it wasn't a stranger. It was the local sheriff, accompanied by 2 deputies, their flashlights cutting through the dimness of the foyer. But they didn't look like they were here to arrest Elena or Marcus. They looked grim, solemn, and focused entirely on me. "Clara Vance?" the sheriff asked, stepping into the light. He held a pair of handcuffs, not for the others, but for me. "I'm afraid we have a warrant for your arrest, issued by the court an hour ago."